Welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 199, Navigating and Embracing the Unfamiliar. To complete our month focused on letting go, I think we need to name the elephant in the room. The potential sadness, sense of loss, and maybe even regret that we might encounter having let things go. We become so used to our own internal landscape and our physical surroundings that staying with changes we've intentionally made can still be a bit tricky. What makes me say that? Oh, probably because I've been there a time or two. So in this episode, I'm talking about how we maintain our course, how we keep going on our chosen path even when we wobble, how we develop our resilience in the face of opposition and external or even internal challenges. I will share from my experience more than from any particular theory or thought leader's perspective. So take this as my thought leadership, as I'm best qualified to talk about my own journey after all. As we journey through life, we often encounter situations, concepts, and experiences that are new to us. These novelties can be broadly categorised into two categories, the unknown and the unfamiliar. And what I realised is just how helpful it is for me to distinguish between these two. They're often used interchangeably, yet marking the difference is significant for me. In my world, the unknown refers to things, concepts, or situations that are entirely beyond my knowledge or awareness. The unknown represents a state of absolute ignorance where we have no prior information or experience or understanding of the subject in question. It is, in essence, a blank canvas waiting to be filled with knowledge or exploration. Now, personally, I find a blank canvas somewhat daunting. I still remember being appointed to a new role and being asked to write my own job description. I floundered for many days and didn't feel able to ask for fear of looking foolish. Gladys, my inner critic, had a field day with me during that particular time, I can tell you. To use my model of learning zones, a task like this is way out in the fear and anxiety zone for me. And it may not be like that for you. As Pema Chodron said, it's not a terrible thing that we feel fear when faced with the unknown. It's part of being alive, something we all share. I just prefer not to feel real fear too often. The unfamiliar, on the other hand, encompasses things, concepts or situations that I have some knowledge of or have encountered in a limited capacity, but which remain largely foreign or strange. This hazy degree of familiarity means these things are probably at my learning edge, that bit beyond my competency zone. I, maybe naively, consider my post-letting go state as one of unfamiliarity. Why do I say that? Well, if I know what it was like to own, possess, occupy or believe certain things, it doesn't feel beyond the realm of my imagination to understand what it might be like without them. So for me, the final part of my letting go process requires me to acclimatise to this unfamiliar space in time. A useful analogy for me is when I go on holiday to a warmer climate. That first moment when I step outside the plane at the top of the steps leading to the tarmac, the heat, humidity and brightness has often taken my breath away, and quite literally. That first night or day seems a bit challenging, and then I tend to acclimatise to the new conditions. And each can be unfamiliar but not entirely unknown. As humans, we are wired to adapt. That's what evolution is. And if we struggle to adapt, we may become irrelevant or even find ourselves heading towards extinction. Now I remember why I'm a lifelong learner, so I can adapt more readily. I'm reminded here of the often misquoted Charles Darwin, who didn't talk about survival of the fittest. What he actually said is, it is not the most intellectual of the species that survives. It's not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is best able to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. So whether the changing environment is thrust upon us or invited by choice, we need to be able to adapt. And the post-letting go requires us to adapt too. Here are some of the basics that I know I need to have in place if I'm going to navigate and acclimatise to the unfamiliar. I need my why, the reason I've intentionally chosen to step into the unfamiliar. What am I hoping to achieve? What benefits will or should it deliver? How will my life be different? The next thing I need is the journey ahead of me mapped out in such a way that I can engage with it. I'm more of a kinesthetic than a visual person, so I almost need to be able to walk the route of my planned journey, even if only symbolically. When I do that, I notice that I can feel what the journey entails as I move from one step to the next. In that process, I'm creating my sense of familiarity. Next on the list of things I need are some risk mitigation strategies for when I'm tempted off my path. This is where my project and program management experience comes into play. And I don't see anticipating risks as negative in any way. It would be if identifying them got me scared, so I froze or ran away. The point of anticipating risks is to put in place plans to minimise the probability of that thing knocking me off course, and to have my plan B contingencies up my sleeve to reduce the impact. I'll talk about this more when I look at relapse prevention strategies. Next on the list of things I need is a really clear and felt sense of my boundaries. There's my kinesthesia again. If I'm going to flourish in this unfamiliar place with its inherent peaks and valleys, I need to know what I'm going to allow, what I'll stop, and what I'll reinforce. I have Tony Gaskins to thank for that particular quote, and I remind myself and others of it often. Finally, on the list of things I need is my trusty kit of tools and techniques, refreshed, replaced if necessary, and fit for purpose. The reality is I never quite know what I'm going to encounter, but knowing I'll have something in my kit that is either just the job or will do at a push is so reassuring. Obviously, a sledgehammer will crack a nut, but it needs wielding with care so as not to completely obliterate the nut. It was Stephen Covey who reminded us in his 7th habit to sharpen the saw, physically, emotionally, mentally and spiritually, in order to be more effective. And we need an almost literal interpretation for the tools at our disposal. So I mentioned relapse prevention earlier, and it's one of the techniques I use over and over when making significant changes or letting go. It's so relevant here, but a quick word of warning: it comes from therapeutic addiction work and is used to maintain somebody's recovery and avoid returning to the addictive or harmful behaviours. In our context, we might use it to ensure that we don't pick up what we've let go of. The main goal here is to build resilience against the potential setbacks we may face, so we develop the skills and strategies needed for the long term. I include relapse prevention in all of my intentional change programs, and a summary of the steps I find most useful are: firstly, identifying the triggers. So what are the specific situations, emotions, thoughts, and people that may trigger thoughts of relapse? This process helps people become more self-aware of their vulnerabilities. Next in the process is developing coping skills. We work together to develop competence in the skills required to deal with the triggers effectively. In other words, my risk management again. This may include stress management techniques, problem-solving strategies, communication skills, and assertiveness training. The third step in the process is creating a relapse prevention plan. This is personalised by the individual to meet their needs, which outline strategies to deal with potential triggers. The fourth part of the process is building a support system. You've heard me talk before about the importance of a strong support network, those people you can reliably turn to when needed. And finally, it's about monitoring and self-reflection. This enables you to stay accountable and recognise any adjustments made and any relapses prevented. Clearly, when dealing with full-on addiction, this process is initiated and managed in conjunction with a therapist or counsellor, and we can use the basics when sustaining ourselves in unfamiliar territory. So we may need to increase or piece together bits of our knowledge, find ways to increase our levels of comfort so we manage any unease or hesitation, recognise that this is all learning, something we're pre-wired for, and then adapt accordingly. Life, after all, is one big adventure if we can bring ourselves to see it that way. As Helen Keller said, life is either a daring adventure or nothing. Security does not exist in nature, nor do the children of men as a whole experience it. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than exposure. As a final analogy around letting go and experiencing the unfamiliar, let me share with you why I love dragonflies so much. We know they often represent transformation, change, new beginnings or fresh starts, and sometimes happiness. Perfect. Dragonfly eggs turn into nymphs, shedding their exoskeleton through a series of molts as they grow larger. What you may not know is that unlike the butterfly that through metamorphosis dissolves into a gooey mess before emerging, the dragonfly undergoes 10 to 15 molts during their maturation, and each time they are soft and vulnerable initially. I guess we can all relate to how that feels. That's 10 to 15 times they are leaving behind what kept them safe in order to develop, and this process takes anything from months to years. The final transformation from nymph to beautiful and radiant dragonfly is the final moment of vulnerability. Only once its wings have spread and dried can it fly out of harm's way. So, another beautiful lesson from nature about the importance of letting go in order to grow, and the vulnerability that letting go often entails. In summary, following our letting go and our navigating the unfamiliar or the unknown, come to that, embracing curiosity, being prepared to be vulnerable and staying accountable will lead to personal growth, expanded horizons and an aligned future. Allow me to close with this quote from the author Michael C. Clarke. He said, "When you're nervous about stepping outside of your comfort zone, remind yourself it feels scary because it's unfamiliar, not because I'm incapable." If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.